Larry and I were having such a wonderful conversation, Jane had to come up and say, "Are you waiting for my blessing to get started?" And I am excited to be able to introduce Larry. My intention is to introduce him and then invite Kent Crookston to offer a word of prayer. It's a little out of order from the way we do it in church, but I think this might work. To introduce him and then invite his colleague Kent Crookston to offer a word of prayer, and then we'll invite Larry to address us. Larry St. Clair is currently the director of the Bean Museum, the curator of the herbarium of non-vascular cryptogams in the museum, and a professor of biology at BYU. From 2001 to 2006, he served as chair of the integrative biology department. He's published more than 70 articles in his area with a focus on the use of lichens as biomonitors of air quality and the ecology and restoration of soil crust communities. He's authored or edited 4 books, including a color guidebook to common Rocky Mountain lichens, which was published in 1999. Since 2001, Larry has served as the associate editor or editor of 2 journals in his field and is a recipient of the Sponsored Research Award from BYU's Office of Research and Creative Works. Larry obtained his undergraduate and master's training at BYU in the Department of Botany and Range Science. He earned a PhD from the Department of Environmental, Population, and Organismic Biology at the University of Colorado Boulder. Larry says that his first love has been and always will be teaching. He's taught more than 20 different courses at BYU, including Biology 100 and 130. Over his 36 years of teaching at BYU, he's taught more than 60,000 students in Biology 100 alone. He has received a number of teaching awards over the years, including the Carl G. Mazur General Education Professorship in 1997 through 2000. He's been an Alcuin Teaching Fellow twice, from 1991 to 93, and from 2009 to the present. Larry has served as a bishop twice, once in his home ward and once in a BYU student ward. He currently teaches the gospel doctrine class in his ward. He's an avid reader, loves the outdoors, and spends most of each summer hiking and working in the national parks and wilderness areas of western North America. How can you beat that for a life? Well, Kent, we'll just invite you to come up and offer a word of prayer, and then we'll turn the time to Larry. Larry plans to provide some time for questions at the end, so you can hold those until the end, and we'll be delighted to have that conversation. Well, I'm glad to be here. As I look out who's here, there's some of my favorite people here. My wife has been emailing people left and right to solicit an audience. And I found out about some of that today as I pried it out of the secretary at the museum. I said, "How did you even find out about this? I know who's on the email list for this, and you weren't." So anyway, I appreciate you being here. I'm glad to see Jim here. Jim was the first to accept this responsibility, and I sensed from my inquiry to him when I first got the email from Jane and Alan that he was as uncertain as to what he was supposed to do as I am, and yet as I read through his address, I thought he knew exactly what he was doing, and that didn't surprise me in the least. I'm grateful for this opportunity. The task has been both satisfying and at times a bit unsettling, particularly when I consider the length of my journey, which is now almost 37 years, and the rapidly approaching point where the pattern will most likely change in direction
and emphasis. That's a little unsettling after doing something for this long to realize that it's going to change. After accepting this assignment, as I mentioned earlier, I immediately sought some feedback from Jim. This is what he shared with me. He said, I just winged it. I did a bit of an autobiographical talk for about 40 minutes, perhaps a bit more. Since I presently do some work in LDS thought, but didn't for much of my career, I talked a bit about that transformation. I also talked about the personal relations with teachers that had been helpful to me. And you know what? I guess to some degree I've winged it too. And I hope it measures up for Alan and Jane in terms of what I do here. The image of life as a journey is intriguing. And my first thoughts about my personal journey as an LDS scholar centered around three questions. First, where and how did this journey begin? How far have I come? And how will it end, or is there an end? I suppose part of the reason I've been asked to participate is because my journey has now been in process for almost 37 years. And the Faculty Center folks somehow decided that maybe I've learned some things that may be of use to my friends and colleagues. I'll let you be the judge of that. Clearly, my journey as an LDS scholar has followed two intricately connected and remarkable pathways, faith and science. The two have become so closely interwoven into the very fabric of my life, it is now beyond my capacity to separate them. Professionally and in many ways personally, they define who I am and what I do. Both are absolutely integral to everything that I think about, say, and do. They consistently inform the way I live. Taken together, they have made me a more complete teacher and researcher, and even more importantly, they have blessed and enlightened my efforts as a husband, father, and servant in the kingdom. In describing my journey, I will need to share experiences from both of my pursuits, faith and science. At some point in my life, these two elements fused together, and over time have become largely integrated. For me, the integration process has been gradual but steady. And yet, even after all these years, I find it is still unfinished. I find more and more that what seemed to be conflicts between the two years ago have now, in my own heart and mind, become more completely reconciled and have ultimately yielded an impressive but still incomplete manifestation of what I think may be the very eternal laws that govern matter, energy, and life in all of its manifestations on earth. Now, that's a pretty impressive thing if you can sort some of that out, at least in 37 years. The journey has, for me, my pursuit of truth, both by faith and by science, has been a divine assignment. To seek learning, even by study, and also by faith. The journey has been both exhilarating and at times frustrating. My desire to share hard-won knowledge and connections with my students, and in some cases my family members, has at times been disappointing, particularly when the response has been less than enthusiastic. I remember on one occasion many, many years ago trying to talk to Rita about protein synthesis. She tolerated me for about 20 minutes and then let me know she had all she needed at that point in time. But I've also told her since that in order to be a goddess, she better study her protein synthesis. Let's see. It has been at those times that I have come to realize that some pearls have been for me alone, insights that each traveler must diligently seek for and come to love in the context of their own journey. At virtually every important juncture in my life, there has been someone who has blessed and influenced my choices and my actions for good. In some cases, it was my parents, or a sibling, or my wife, or my children, or a friend, or a teacher. I have not taken this journey alone. My life is truly the product of many kind and dear people who have helped me along the way. In reality, no one's personal journey is ever solitary. For the rest of the time, what I'd like to do is share with you some experiences with some of these people that have influenced and shaped my life and my journey. I come from a convert heritage. My parents joined the church when I was 2 years old. It took them 18 months of several missionary sets coming to the home and teaching them about the gospel of Jesus Christ. My mother, I think, believed early on. My father was a bit more reticent. I think one of the challenges he faced was that he had no word of wisdom problems. Absolutely none. He had gone through World War II beginning at the age of 18 and yet didn't smoke, which was a remarkable accomplishment during World War II. But due to what they characterized as a miraculous event in their family, they both felt that the missionaries had been instrumental in blessing their lives in connection with a severe illness that my older brother suffered. My mother, like I said, I think knew from the beginning and was ready to join the church early on. My father, because of the miraculous experience and because of a dream he had in answer to a prayer, decided that he too should join the church. So when I was 2 years old, they actually joined the church. My mother, in my patriarchal blessing, it talks about my mother. And it specifically says, Brother St. Clair, you have been taught the eternal principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ at the knees of your good mother. My mother gave me both a love of the restored gospel and its powerful message of hope and salvation, as well as a deep and abiding love for plants. This from a woman who did not finish the 9th grade, but who had a remarkable sense of what was important to her family, and particularly to her second son. She saw in me a deep inclination towards faith and a love of living things. And she had a remarkable capacity for nurturing both my faith and my love of science at their earliest and perhaps most vulnerable points. In spite of the fact that our family was largely inactive in the church for more than 10 years, my mother often made sure that I knew how she felt about 3 things. First, the Book of Mormon. She had a testimony of the Book of Mormon and wanted me to know that. She also loved David O. McKay, so she regularly referred to President McKay. In fact, I can remember very distinctly her saying, you know what, it's my feeling that the next prophet will be President Brown. And at that time, I says, Mother, I really don't think so. And she said, how would you possibly know that? And I said, because he's not in the right position in the quorum of the 12 apostles. And she was quite disappointed that she wasn't able to pick out the next prophet. The third thing that she loves were full-time missionaries. And she had 2 wishes for me. And I won't tell you what the first is. It's much too embarrassing. But the second wish was that I should serve a full-time mission. At age 11, after almost 10 years of inactivity, my mother called the mission home in our hometown and asked them to send the missionaries to teach her son. They did, and I was baptized at age 11 in August of 1961. My decision to become a teacher is a rather complicated story, and at times it was challenging. There were people that were both difficult for me to deal with, and there were people that blessed and enriched my lives. In the 1st grade, I started in Virginia in the 1st grade, actually in Alexandria, and in that year I went to 4 different 1st grades. 3 in Virginia and 1 in Italy, where my father was transferred. He was in the military at the time. My second 1st grade teacher, and I don't remember her name, and perhaps it's because the experience was so awful, gave me an experience that altered me for many, many years, academically speaking. I can still remember we had gone out to recess. And when we came back in, we dutifully filed into our seats because this teacher was stern and very demanding, and we were all, at least me, I can't speak for the other students in the class, but I was absolutely terrified of this woman. And we sat down in our seats, and she said, now I'm going to have someone count to 100. And I thought, oh my goodness sakes alive, I hope she doesn't call on me because I can't get any further than 11. And part of my problem is that due to an illness, I had some surgery when I was 4 and had not been able to attend kindergarten. So I couldn't read, I couldn't say my ABCs, I couldn't count except to 10 or 11. And sure enough, all the kids kind of ducked their heads. And I remember very distinctly thinking, Larry, she's going to call on you. And I thought, no, she can't. I can't do this. And so sure enough, she said, Larry St. Clair, stand up beside your desk, count to 100. And so I stood up dutifully, and I did 1, 2, and I thought, maybe I can drag this out for 2 hours. Who knows, But getting to 10 I knew was going to be a real challenge, and taking 2 hours to do it was unreasonable. So anyway, as I approached 11 and the length got longer and longer in between each number, the little girl behind me sensed that I had a need. And so she whispered 12. And I got 12. And I got 13. And I got 14. And then the teacher wised up. and she simply moved slightly to one side to where she could look at me and the little girl behind me. And the little girl behind me thought, Larry, I was willing to help, but I am not willing to die for you. And so I stood there, and I stood there, and I stood there, and I just felt absolutely overwhelmed with the pressure. And then the teacher came down, and she stood right in front of me, and she shook her finger in my face and said, Larry St. Clair, you are dumb. And I can remember a cloud descended over my brain. I felt it. It was tangible. And I thought, I've worried about this. I thought that perhaps I might be dumb, and now it's been confirmed by a teacher, and it must be true. It was 4 years before that cloud started to uncover my brain. I can remember many times sitting with my mother or my father and trying to do an assignment in a reading workbook or trying to solve a math problem. And that cloud would come down, and I would know clearly that I was not capable of doing that. An interesting thing happened in the 5th grade. I do remember Miss Dash, and I remember that she was a remarkable, loving, supportive teacher. And I started to learn how to read, and I started to learn how to be a student. And again, I had a singular experience. One day, Miss Dash was working with us in the dictionary, and she had passed out to each of us a dictionary. And the game was she would call out a word, and we would look it up in the dictionary as quick as we could, and when we had found it, we raised our hands. And I can remember 2 words in a row, I simply opened the dictionary, and it was at the word. And I thought, heaven forbid, I actually found the word in the dictionary. And I says, Miss Dash, I found it, it's here. And she come look, she says, that's great. And then the next one, I did the same thing. And then she came at that point in time and stood beside me, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, Larry, you are really very smart. And I thought to myself, could it be? Could it be that the 1st grade teacher was wrong and Miss Dash is right? And I can remember in my resilient heart, my heart told me, Miss Dash has got it right. I had another experience, and things improved steadily. But in the 11th grade, I had another experience that was probably the most important factor in shaping and pushing me towards being a teacher. And it was with a math teacher. I started out in Virginia in Algebra 2 in the 11th grade. And I remember very distinctly, when we moved to Oklahoma, my father planned our move based upon Thanksgiving holiday, so we wouldn't miss any school. And I remember the teacher in Virginia had made an assignment in our Algebra 2 book, and it was on page 100. And I remembered it very well. And as we traveled to Oklahoma, I diligently completed the assignment, assuming that I would turn it in on Monday in Oklahoma to my new Algebra 2 teacher. I walked into Algebra 2, Mrs. Miller's class in Oklahoma, sat down, and new student in the school, didn't have a clue what was going on, but knew that I had my assignment for Algebra 2 completed. And Mrs. Miller said, open your books to page 232. And I thought, oh my goodness, that doesn't sound good at all. So I turned to the girl beside me and I said, you know what, say that again. What page number did she say? And she says, 232. And I thought, my goodness, it was Thanksgiving break. What have these people been doing during the break that they're 132 pages ahead of me? I didn't understand or hear a thing for the rest of the class period. And I walked up to Mrs. Miller at the end of the class, and I said, Mrs. Miller, I'm new in the school, new in your class, and I just came from Virginia where our assignment in this same book was on page 100. And today, you've been working on page 232. Now, I'll be honest with you. I thought she would probably say to me, why don't you go downstairs and drop this class and add typing? That's not what she said. She said, Larry, how much guts do you have? And I can remember very distinctly thinking, well, most of it's on the floor in the back of the room there, but she wouldn't let me go. She said, will you come early in the morning? I will. Will you come in the afternoon after school? I will. And she says, then you get started. We'll catch you up before the end of Christmas holiday, or before Christmas holiday. And so every morning I would come in early and Mrs. Miller would help me. Every afternoon I would stay late and she would help me. And so for the whole rest of that term, we worked morning and afternoon to get me caught up. I can remember times going up to her desk and asking the same question 6 or 7 times. Never once did she scold me. Never once did she question my right to ask her yet again the same question. She loved us all, and she inspired us all. At the end of that term, with her good graces, she gave me a D. I continued to work. At the end of my junior year, Mrs. Miller passed out our scorecard for that year, and she had given me an A. And she made it very clear, Larry, you earned this A. And I thought to myself, no, Mrs. Miller, you and I together earned that A. She was a remarkable person. When I left to go to Ricks College to begin school at Ricks, my father taught me a great lesson. We stood at the car waiting for me to get in. I was going to go to Ricks in the summer of 1968 and begin summer term there and spend a year prior to going on a mission. My dad told me 2 things. He says, now, Larry, I know you want to go on a mission at the end of your freshman year, but he says, I need to let you know that we don't have enough money for you to go on a mission. My dad was an enlisted man in the U.S. Army, made very little money, and yet everything he had went into his family and caring for his family. And I told him, I says, Dad, don't worry about that. The Lord will help us take care of that. I know he will. And then he handed me a check. The check was for $1,000. I had never seen a check for $1,000. And he said, this is all I can do for you. Years later, I found a little book that went with that $1,000. And my father had gone down to the bank and borrowed $1,000, which he paid back at $3.31 a week for I don't know how many weeks and how many years, so that I could have the money to go to school. And he told me 2 things. He says, you have 2 responsibilities in school. He says, I expect you to get good grades, and I expect as soon as you land in Rexburg, Idaho, that you'll go get a job and help yourself. And I can tell you that when that year at Ricks College was finished, that I still had $441 in the bank. And a loving bishop who had said that he and his family, who had lost a son at age 12 that was my age, and that they had saved the money for someone else to serve a mission that their son would have served, that bishop came to my family and said, this money is for Larry. For all these years, we've been saving it for him without even knowing that he existed, but that the Lord would provide. I got to go on a mission, I got to go to school, but more importantly, I learned that I had a responsibility and that I had to work hard. I had to get a job. I had to do well in school. My dad taught me that. When I came home from a mission, I met a fellow by the name of Sam Rushforth. He was a faculty member in the botany department at the time. He was teaching the Plant Kingdom course. And it was over in the Marr building, one of the large lecture halls. There were 250 students in the class. And somehow or the other, Sam Rushforth figured out that I was in that class. And he singled me out. And I can remember at the end of the semester, and it was just halfway through my junior year, Sam pulled me aside and he said, what are your plans? And I said, well, I've decided I want to teach high school biology. And he says, no, you don't. And I said, I don't? And he says, no, you don't want to teach high school biology. You want to get a graduate degree, right? And I said, I don't know. I don't know that I can do that. And he says, you can do that. And so I spent the rest of my undergraduate experience and my first time as a graduate student for a master's degree working with Sam Rushforth. I never would have done that on my own if Sam had not expressed confidence that I could do that. He was pivotal in my decision to go on. As a young missionary, and I've shared this experience before, so I will move quickly through this one in another setting. I shared this. I learned about discipleship. I remember very distinctly studying Spanish in high school and thinking, man, oh man, oh man, I cannot learn languages. I'm pretty confident that in that area I don't have any capacity. And I remember the teacher would say, now here's the rule, and here are the 5,000 exceptions you have to remember. And I thought, I'm sure glad I started out with a tough language to begin with, and that I'm okay, pretty good with English, but Spanish, I can't learn languages. And so I was very intent on serving a mission in an English-speaking area. If my call had been to Detroit, Michigan, I would have been absolutely delighted. Anywhere but where I had to learn a foreign language. And I had met some missionaries who had been in Japan on their missions. And the only word I could use to describe them was they were weird. They were strange. Every other word was huh, huh, huh. When I got to Japan, I realized that the Japanese equivalent to huh was ne. Everything was ne. They wanted you to agree with them on everything. And I thought, I don't want to go to Japan. Certainly don't. I don't like fish. I don't like rice. I don't want to go around saying huh my whole life. And so I don't want to go to Japan. So I stand in a room somewhere on Rich College campus. I can't remember where it was. Rita was there. All my friends were there. They had heard me say this many, many times. And I open the mission call, and I say, it says, Dear Elder St. Clair, you're hereby called to serve in the Japan-Okinawa mission. And I think to myself, there has been a horrible mistake made. And all the people in the room are they think, this is a joke. He's just teasing us. And I'm thinking, I wish I was teasing you. I wish this said you were going to Albany, New York. There's a mistake that's been made. But I saw the signature at the bottom of the page, and it was David O. McKay. And I had raised my hand to sustain that man as a prophet of God. And I thought, he must know something I don't know. So I decided, all right, I'll go. We'll see if we can figure this out. I ended up in the LTM, in the third group to go through the LTM in Hawaii, the Church College of Hawaii. And I have never had a more difficult experience in my whole life. I was overwhelmed. There were no words in Japanese that even vaguely resembled English. If you study Spanish or French or German, you can actually say, that must be the same word as this word in English. In Japanese, there were no equivalents. I couldn't think of any, except English words that had been put into the Japanese language. And I was discouraged. I was more discouraged than I had ever been in my life. At the drop of a hat, tears would come to my eyes. And the only thing that kept me there, to be honest with you, was the fact that I knew if I went home, this mother, whose three priorities in her life for her children was that they would have a testimony of the Book of Mormon, that they would support and sustain the prophet, and that they would serve a mission. I thought, I can't let this lady down. And maybe, just maybe, I will do so badly here that they'll let me stay in Hawaii and just teach in Hawaii. That didn't happen. And so one day, I was particularly discouraged, and I'd been reading my New Testament, and the mail came. And one of the missionaries says, the mail is down in the office. So I went down, and there was a letter from my father there. And that was the first sign that something was wrong. My dad never wrote to me. And if my dad had written to me, there was something drastically wrong. So I opened the letter up, and my dad's letter was very short. He says, Dear Larry, your mother's in the hospital. She's quite sick. We don't know what's going to happen. I'll let you know as much as I can when I find something out. Love, Dad. That was it. That was the end of the letter. And they were in Germany. I was in Hawaii. This is 1969. I had no idea how to place a phone call to Germany from Hawaii. And so I knew the only thing I could do was wait for the next letter. I went back to my room, and I can remember I knelt down by my bed, and I said, you know what? I am really unhappy. And I'm particularly disappointed in you for, number one, calling me to Japan, and now my mother's sick. And what kind of deal is this? Here I am trying to be a missionary, trying to learn this awful language, and you're going to do this to me too? And I was very angry and very upset. I sat back up on the bed, and I opened Matthew back up again, and I had stopped at verse 37 in chapter 10. This is what verses 37 to 39 said. He that loveth father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. And I realized, I was confident that Matthew had written that for Elder St. Clair. And I knelt back down by the bed. And in tears, I said, I am so sorry. I have missed the whole point. I have failed to understand that you are the first priority in my life. But I promise you, from now on, there will be no question that I will be completely committed, and I will be an honorable and faithful servant in Japan or wherever you need me. But if you would please bless my mom, that would really help. But I can tell you, regardless of what happens to my mother, I will move forward in faith and renewed commitment. I discovered what discipleship was all about. That changed everything. And I can tell you, and some of you know from personal experience, that Japan is never far from my heart or my thoughts. I love Japan. God knew of all the places that I could have been sent, that Japan is where I belonged. There's a couple of things I've learned about setting priorities and honoring those priorities. My major professor at the University of Colorado several years came over and spent some time with us here at BYU. He was retired at that point. One day in the lab, he pulled me aside and he said, Larry, I have something I need to tell you. He said, you have the capacity to be a world-class lichenologist. Now I'm telling you, there aren't very many of us. It wouldn't have been a tough stretch anyway. But he says, you have the capacity to be a world-class lichenologist. But I'm going to tell you, you never will be. And I thought, where is Sam going with this? Sam Shushan from the University of Colorado. And then he said, but let me tell you why. He says, you spend way too much time with your family. You spend way too much time with your church. And you spend way too much time with Biology 100 students. He says, but I think you're doing the right thing. And I can tell you this day that I don't ever care to be known as a world-class lichenologist. I love lichens. I love doing research with them. I've published things and I've done all that. But I can tell you, I would much rather be known as a world-class dad, a world-class husband, and a world-class teacher of Biology 100 students at BYU. I had another experience teaching Biology 100. I used to take and prepare a roll when I was teaching in sections of 250, and I would circulate it through the class and have them mark the roll. And I'd tell them flat out, you missed 3 days, I'm going to give you a call. In this one class one year, I remember very distinctly, I got behind in tracking the roll and seeing who was not there. And then I noticed in some communication I had that a student had committed suicide. And I found out what his name was. And I thought, oh my goodness, I think he's in my class. So I went back to the roll and I thumbed through, and there was Brad Weber's name. He had missed 4 days in a row. And I had missed the opportunity to call Brad and tell him I missed him and that I cared about him and that I was anxious to help him. Now I found out later on that Brad had a lot of issues. But I can tell you, that gave me a renewed commitment to the individual student, to make sure that I did everything in my power to make a difference for them. I'd like to talk just a minute about staying committed to what is important as I wrap things up here. Years ago, Rita was called to be a Relief Society president. She came to me and she said, what advice do you have? And I says, well, I just one rule. I says, do what the Lord wants you to do. Do what the Lord dictates. Don't run the Relief Society on the basis of what you think the people want. Do what the Lord wants you to do. And she very conscientiously followed that. And she shared with me an experience she had where she said, one day I was preparing for a presidency meeting. So I knelt down and I asked the Lord, I says, what's the most important thing we can do in this presidency meeting? And she said the Spirit overwhelmingly communicated to her that we were to see that a card was sent to Doug Carter. Doug was dying of cancer up at LDS Hospital in Salt Lake City. In fact, he was dead within the week. And she was kind of overwhelmed because she thought, a card to Doug Carter? Why didn't this revelation come to the bishop? Why didn't it come to the Elders Quorum president? Why did it come to me? And I think maybe it was because Rita was the only one listening. And of all the things that were on the agenda for that day, the Lord made it clear that the people thing was the most important thing. That a note to Doug Carter in his hour of dying was the thing that was most important to do. I've never forgotten that. One other experience I had just the other day, and I brought some technology along. I'm not real good at technology, but I think I can make this work. I got a phone mail message the other day, and I want you to listen to it. And I've kept it on my phone mail list because I've realized that whenever I'm not sure what's important, I play this. And frankly, there have been days when I've played it 3 or 4 times. And I'm just going to let you listen to it, and you're going to say, what is that? But here it is. Listen, it's short. That's Lucy. Lucy's my 2-year-old granddaughter. What she said was this: Papa, Lucy, I miss you. I love you. Papa, Papa, goodbye. We can never lose track of what is most important and keep that always in the forefront of our lives. As is the case with most life journeys, mine has been full of choices, some clear and easy and others painfully difficult. It has been those painfully difficult choices that have consistently yielded the most important gifts of knowledge and understanding. Yet, frankly, if it had been up to me, I would have probably opted out of the painful experiences. But in the end, the Lord, in his infinite wisdom, knew far better than I did about what I needed, and I have always been deeply grateful for the painfully difficult choices and the blessings they have so profoundly provided. As I have faced decisions about directions and priorities, I have often reflected on the words of Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. They have always seemed to resonate in my heart. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. May each of you consistently choose the road less traveled by, and by so doing, faithfully align your hearts and souls with the most important things, and at the end of your journey find that it has indeed made all the difference. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Thank you. Now, Alan said you may want to ask some questions. You may just want to leave, and that's all right too. So, Alan has a microphone. If you wanted to ask some questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Love to capture what your questions are, or comments.
Well, that was easy, Alan.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
just thinking
I
that.
should have known Kent would come up with one.
So fast.
You know, Larry, can you hear me on the mic all right?
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't ask you this in front of people, but I realize I'm wondering what in the world happened in your mind when you changed your mind and came back to me and said, let's reinvent the whole college.
What possessed me to do that?
Well, I'm just wondering why. I
Okay.
never asked you,
Okay.
you know, because you were pretty upset about the assignment. You came back and had transformed. Something happened.
Kent was our dean several years ago in the College of Life Sciences, a remarkable leader, a man that I love and respect very much. And he's talking about an assignment he gave me to reinvent the department. And I came back to him and had the audacity to suggest that what we really needed to do is reinvent the college. And if I understand correctly, you're asking, Kent, what was going through my mind when I came to you? Yeah. I can tell you that as we looked at the Botany and Range Science Department, it became clear to me that there were things across the whole college that needed to be realigned. And that by doing just Botany and Range Science, we could never accomplish the bigger tasks that needed to be done. And so I just was audacious enough to come back and say, Kent, I think Dean Crookston is what, I never called him Kent until after he was no longer Dean. But Dean Crookston, I think we need to reinvent the whole college. The remarkable part of the story is not that I asked the question, it's that he seriously considered that as a possibility. And that was a mark of his greatness and goodness as a leader. And it was not an easy task, and there were a lot of challenges and ups and downs to it. But I think the College of Life Sciences is a far better college today because of that. Oh, I was young and foolish. It's the only good answer I can think of to that question. You know, he says, you accepted the assignment, and I thought I was just crazy enough to think that I could maybe do something with it. Others? Jane?
I loved your story, Larry. I appreciate that. I'm wondering, as you became a scholar, which was incredible from the time, the story you told us in the first grade, was it, when the teacher pronounced you dumb? But you did become a scholar, and by then you were a committed disciple. How did those two interact with each other, being a disciple and being a scholar? Do they influence each other?
You know what, as I mentioned earlier, the two have become interwoven over time. I can't imagine trying to do science without my faith. Or frankly, I can't imagine being the person of faith that I am without my knowledge of science. You know, lots of people feel like that they're incongruent, that they don't fit together, that they don't belong together. And yet for me, that they have, my understanding and appreciation for science has been strengthened through the Spirit. And I've been guided and blessed by the Spirit to be more effective in my science. While at the same time, my science has actually caused me to appreciate the goodness and graciousness of the Creator at a level I don't think I could have ever appreciated without having both of those working together.
With the difference between science and religion, have you had, and your faith being a part of that, have you had experiences here on campus where you have had to work with students who are struggling with that, between the science and the faith, and how has your faith helped you in regards to that? Yeah.
You know, and that's not infrequent for students to struggle with the interface between faith and science as ways of knowing. And what I try and do on a consistent basis is let them know that as a scientist, I have a testimony. And that I take care of both parts of my life as a scientist and as a person of faith. And then I try and help them to understand that what many people perceive or think are the conflicts between the two can be addressed, at least in some way or the other. The other thing I try and help them to understand is the fact that faith automatically implies, and the definition that Alma gives and Paul gives substantiates this, that faith implies some measure of uncertainty. That if you're going to be a person of faith, you're going to have to deal with some uncertainty in your life. And that's for a purpose. And I think the Lord explains that beautifully in terms of the fact that if we came here knowing everything, if we came here with a full recollection of the premortal experience and everything intact already, that there would be no test. There would be no opportunity to make choices and exercise agency effectively. And so I try to help them to understand that if you don't know, or if you have concerns about not knowing, understand that that's the way the Lord intended it to be. I also try and help them to understand, and I love this quote from President Eyring. He says, great faith has a short shelf life. And I say that often because as a reminder to me that faith is something you have to pay attention to every day. And I let them know that your faith has a short shelf life. If you don't take care of it, then you will lose it. And so you need to study your scriptures, and you need to pray, and you need to be committed in the kingdom in order to keep that testimony strong. And you know what? We've lost some along the ways, unfortunately. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are absolutely determined that there is some sort of absolute answer out there. And I tell them, faith implies some measure of uncertainty. Get used to it and embrace it and love it, because it's a great opportunity. Don't try and wax yourself or God into some absolute corner, because you're going to end up very disappointed in the end. And that seems to resonate with them. They seem to understand that there's a way to do this, to reconcile the two without losing either one in the process. Orrin? I think they're going to want to get the microphone to you, so you can project.
What is your feeling about the role of the museum, the Monte L Museum, in rather than just being a repository for insects and plants and animals, but being a tool in telling the story of the creation?
You know what, I think at this university and at the Bean Life Science Museum, and you're going to think I set Orrin up with that question. I really didn't, but I'm not surprised that he would ask it. He's our LDSP liaison with the museum and the College of Life Sciences. I can tell you this, that at this university, at that museum, we have a unique opportunity to do something that you could not do at any other life science, or for that matter, natural history museum. And that is that we are both people of science and people of faith. And that museum and its resources can not only be used to do cutting-edge research, but they can also be used to bear testimony of the Savior. And part of our plan with the expansion of the museum is to bring that front and center. And not in any way to downplay our science, but to clearly take the opportunity to say that his creations, his handiwork, is a remarkable testimony that we see in all the living things on the earth.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
You do often.
Being your wife, I saw early on in your career that you could be quite critical of imperfections of what you saw at BYU, and having high expectations of BYU. How did you learn to deal with that and change? Because I did see it, and I think it's important to share that.
Okay, thanks. And she's right. There were times where there was real frustrations with things that I didn't understand, that didn't make sense, and I've learned a couple of things. First of all, I've learned that university administrators see things that the rest of us don't see, and that they have to make decisions that the rest of us may not like, but they see and understand things on a scale that none of the rest of us understand. And they're acting in good faith. And I've talked to some of those people who work with them and associate with them. And I've come to understand that they're remarkable people doing a very, very difficult job. That was very helpful for me to come to grips with. The other thing that I decided that I think was very important was the fact that I could either detract or I could contribute. And I decided that it was much better for me and for my colleagues if I decided to become a contributor and to try and help things move forward in the right way. And that was a big factor for me. Rita, she was very generous there. She used to say, I worry about your rebel nature. And I'd say, but I have a testimony, so I'll be all right. So yeah, those two things, understanding that some people are doing things that are very difficult and they're good people trying to do a tough job, and criticism isn't helping. And then the other thing, deciding to be a contributor rather than a detractor, was very helpful.
What advice would you provide, or what lessons have you learned trying to balance a demanding vocation and serving in positions like serving as a bishop, which you've done twice, and balancing a large family?
You know what, I think, again, you have to keep your priorities straight. And the other thing I've learned is that I can tell you, having served twice as a bishop for almost 10 years between the two, that those were some of my most productive years. My biggest concern was whether or not I was devoting proper time to my family. And I think the answer is to do things that the Lord wants you to do. In other words, if the primary president comes to you and says, we need to do this, then if I had those opportunities again, rather than saying, yes, ma'am, we'll do it, I would say, let's you and I ask the Lord whether or not that's what we want to do, whether or not that's how we want to invest our time and energy, whether that's in the best interest of the families in our ward, and what the Lord wants us to accomplish here. So I think being diligent in doing what the Lord wants done means that you're always going to measure up to Him. And if you measure up to Him, it really doesn't matter if at times you don't measure up with the Relief Society president or the Elders Quorum president. If you're doing what He wants done, then your life is focused and moving in the right directions. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.